In the 1950s, America had broken free from the shackles of wartime economics. It was walking with the swagger of a nation that had the world by the tail. Scientists had harnessed nuclear energy. Jet-propelled airplanes were breaking speed records, and the race to space was on. But perhaps more than anything else, one thing melded imagination and consumerism, putting this era in perfect context. The concept car. Unlike satellites, rockets, and jet planes, these dream cars were accessible. People flocked to auto shows to see concept cars in their titanium-bodied glory. They were snapshots of how America perceived its future. They were simply out of sight, unforgettable. But what happened to them? Most were destroyed. Some just plain vanished. But amazingly, some are still here.
It's a giant machine. You have to say it's cool. When you're driving it, you're the big man on the block, and it was the big man on the block when it rolled into town. You couldn't deny it, you know?
Ford in the early 60s wants to get their name out for being innovative, stylistically dramatic, and so in this case, it's a 1962 T-Bird convertible. But the car is shipped off to do a pretty radical idea with the body.
Reintroducing the 1953 GM Futurliner and the 1963 Ford Thunderbird Italien. American medical researcher and virologist Jonas Salk announces his polio vaccine. 2 years later, successful trials would lead to the virtual elimination of the crippling virus in the U.S. In the world of computers, the UNIVAC 1103 becomes the first commercial computer to use random access memory. Around every corner there's progress. America can't get enough of it, and the automotive industry is ready to deliver. This is the 1953 GM Futurliner.
It's a giant machine, and it's a whole lot of engineering and styling, which really, you have to say it's cool. When you're driving it, you're the big man on the block, and it was the big man on the block when it rolled into town. You couldn't deny it, you know?
In an era that witnessed some of the most outlandish concept cars the world has ever seen, this was something completely different. After all, it wasn't even a car. And unlike many concept creations of the 50s, there was more than just one.
When you looked up at it, anybody would almost have to say, wow, I would say. And when you see them and realize that that was way back then, you'd say, wow. Then you see 12 of them, not just one, but 12. That was really a wow.
So what was GM doing with an entire fleet of futuristic buses? Were they making a bold foray into the world of public transportation? Were they experimenting with new technologies that would revolutionize the future of mass transport? Surprisingly, the answer is none of the above. These vehicles were designed for one purpose: marketing.
Futurliner was made for the Parade of Progress, made to advertise and promote General Motors' new products and bring them to the people, make them aware. Seeing is believing.
To some, this convoy of 33-foot-long abnormalities may have looked more like an invasion from outer space than a parade. But this fleet wasn't coming to deliver armies of little green men. The only thing the Parade of Progress delivered was, well, progress.
It was not a bus for people or to haul them or anything, just products back there, new products, exciting products, you know, sound waves, stereo, microwaves, engines of various kinds, automatic transmissions, design of prototype cars, and showed some pretty far out things for way back then. They would come into a town and put on a show free. They had an educational program where students could win a four-year scholarship. It was a very fruitful way for General Motors to promote themselves.
Promotion cleverly disguised as education. In the automotive world, it's an idea just as unusual as the Futurliners themselves, but it worked. The concept was unique, but it wasn't new, and the Futurliners weren't either. Different versions of the fleet had been around since 1936, the original start date of GM's Parade of Progress project. The event went on hiatus during World War II, but in 1953, the Futurliners were redesigned and the parade picked up right where it left off.
The world was evolving a lot, you know. Some of these people, you got to remember, were from the horse and buggy age, and to see something this far advanced, it was quite a thing.
In the early to mid-50s, auto shows were all the rage. These glitzy events were reserved for the privileged populations of urban centers, but GM knew that America was a big country. This marketing strategy gave the company valuable face time in small-town USA, and the Futurliners were the stars of the show.
When the Parade of Progress rolled into town and they parked these buses, they opened their doors, and all of the different speakers were probably positioned in a spot about like this to talk about and hype their product. This is the original uniform that the workers wore, and this was how they represented GM with their uniform. This is the wheels that are on the front of the Futurliner. The thing being 13 tons necessitated a little additional beef in the front wheels and had to carry all the luggage. And in here we have the engine compartment, and by today's standards, it's a small engine. It's a six-cylinder 302 with 145 horse, pulling around 13 tons.
This vehicle was never used to pull a busload of people, and it's a good thing. Seeing the Futurliners was a thrill, but driving them, not so much.
The parade started in 1953 in Detroit. I joined in the 67th city, Canton, Ohio, in 1954. I drove one of the 12. It was interesting. It was a huge truck, weighed 30,000 pounds, 33 feet long. You climbed up in that driver compartment. You were in the windshield. You had air conditioning, but it never worked. You couldn't see down in front of you, so you had to look ahead, probably 30 yards or 20 yards to see where you were. And the truck would run like 30 miles an hour on the level, 30, 35. And then it would go down a hill. It might go as high as 80. And going up the hill, the next hill, you'd be back at 10 miles an hour.
The GM Futurliners weren't built to exhibit speed. They were built to advertise it, to promote General Motors by winning over the hearts and minds of any town USA.
I worked on the miracles of heat and cold. I showed people how their refrigerators worked. It was trying to interest people into careers of science and engineering, and that was the whole bit with this traveling circus.
The GM Futurliners were the cornerstone of this unforgettable promotional roadshow, and they would go on to become a cornerstone for this automotive era. This spectacle was one of a kind, but it wasn't meant to last forever. Ironically, after a 3-year revival, the Parade of Progress was brought to an end by the very essence of its concept. The GM Futurliner was one of 12 conceptual vehicles that were the cornerstone of GM's long-running Parade of Progress. It was revived in 1953 to deliver glimpses of the future to every corner of America. It was a promotional tool for GM, built on a platform of education and inspiration. But in just 3 short years, the parade would be stopped in its tracks by an ironic roadblock.
The Parade of Progress actually was killed by the progress of the American people. Yep, television. Because General Motors was showing its new technology, well, television was new technology, and the old technology got killed with the new technology of television. So these things were put out to pasture in 56, 57, and television came in the house and did the same job.
It was in Oregon, Portland, Oregon at the time. They decided to shut it down because TV was there. People could stay home at night and see TV. It's what ruined the circus. It's what ruined outside entertainment. What more can I say? I felt let down when it ended. I thought to myself, well, other boys are not going to get a chance to go around and talk to young people about these wonderful gadgets of science and engineering.
The Parade of Progress became destined to live on in memory only. But what did the future hold for the unique buses that bore its name?
Well, they went to various things. This one was painted with the Cadillac emblem and set along the road as an advertisement for Cadillac. Some just plain went to a junkyard. They got used for different things, but they eventually almost all wound up in a poor state of affairs. This is Futurliner number 10, and it deteriorated, sitting outside, rusting, getting in bad shape.
Eventually, Futurliner number 10 was donated to the Natmus Museum in Auburn, Indiana. But there were no funds to refurbish it. With the Parade of Progress long extinct, it seemed the Futurliners were soon to follow. But in the early 90s, that all changed.
About 93, 94, Don Mayton saw it at the Natmus Museum, and he said, that would be neat to restore. Well, he'd been in cars all his life, and I guess some of us are little brutes for punishment and need a big challenge. Took about 20 guys, about 7 years, and various different professionals, from electricians to painters to welders. A lot of people exercise their profession, and they all work together. I think everybody has to have a reason for living and a reason for doing it, and probably one of mine, and I think most of the other guys in the group, is it's just great to go and get an old car and get it running and get it fixed up and be proud of it. So I hope that in the future this thing can be in a museum or something where it's very well preserved.
Some of the Futurliner number 10's brethren still exist in some form or another, but none exemplify the original glory like this one. None capture the essence of the time, the essence of the Parade of Progress.
I think it's interesting from the historical standpoint that you can look back 50 years and see where we were and what we were doing and how far advanced we were. I was lucky to be here when I was a young fellow and traveled the United States the way I did. As I sit here now, I'm thinking back 50 years. I wish I was 50 years younger. But it brings back a lot of good memories, very good memories of the fellows that I worked with, of the leaders that we had, and the shows that we put on, and the people that came to see these shows.
In 1963, years after the end of GM's Parade of Progress, Ford decides to put on a traveling show of its own.
They take stock Ford automobiles, they ship them off to various people to turn them into a show car, and then they're put on the road. So take a really typical American automobile like the T-Bird and give it some Italian touches.
1963. The Italian film 8½, by famed Italian director Federico Fellini, wins the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. Americans are becoming increasingly interested in anything Italian. World War II is a distant memory, but the European influences brought home by American GIs continue to permeate popular culture. And the automotive industry is no exception. This is the 1963 Ford Thunderbird Italien.
I would put this in a stylistic attempt to make a look. So you would take a really typical American automobile like the T-Bird and give it some Italian touches. In this case, underneath of it all, it's a 1962 Ford T-Bird convertible. But the car is shipped off to Dearborn Steel Tubing to do a pretty radical idea with the body.
In the 1950s and 60s, ultra-modern designs and new technologies dominated the auto show circuit. But by 1963, car buffs had seen enough tail fins and bubble-top canopies to last a lifetime. For Ford, the time had come to find new ways to impress the car-buying public.
Ford in the early 60s wants to get their name out for being innovative, stylistically dramatic, and so they begin a program of what they call the Ford Custom Car Caravan. What it is they take stock Ford automobiles, and under Ford's styling department, they ship them off to various people to turn them into a show car, and then they're put on the road. They go to fairs, Ford dealerships around the country. People were very familiar with the company, but it takes their products and shows them in a different light.
Ford's Thunderbird line had been in production for 8 years, already well on its way to popularizing the personal luxury car niche market. So what's so exciting about another T-Bird? This T-Bird challenged long-held perceptions with its intriguing and exotic makeover. Ford made a splash by putting a new twist on an old flame. It capitalized on America's love affair with all things Italian.
I think that the American public became really fascinated with what the Italian designers had been doing, European designers in general. And that goes all the way through the fashion market and everything else.
From a distance, this car may have looked like a typical Thunderbird. But up close, the Italian influence was crystal clear, especially to devoted T-Bird aficionados. This show car's customized, elongated, fastback roofline was an automotive design cue that was very popular in Europe.
The principal line is the roof line all the way down from the windshield to the trunk, and that occurred from taking the old convertible top and Xing it, then getting a plywood form, applying clay on top of the plywood form, and fiberglass on top of that giving it a European style, hence the Italien, from the windscreen all the way down to the end of the trunk. This side detailing is a result of its makeover. Along the quarter panel, there would be 3 standard kind of chrome pieces that went with the more traditional T-Bird look.
In the 1950s and 60s, one of the hallmarks of Italian automotive design was the subtle elegance that only a craftsman's hands can create. The body of this show car may not have been customized by Italian coach builders, but it still put on a show. Even the interior was like a tailored Italian suit, very elegant and very chic.
The seats are very comfortable. They support you very well. But one interesting feature that I think is kind of cool is the steering wheel. Kind of moves with you as you get in and out of the car. You have less to slide around. You can get it out of your way to get in and bring it back in front of you when you need it.
On the 1963 auto show circuit, the Ford Thunderbird Italien was a different kind of different. Its luscious Italian looks made an impact. It attracted attention because it challenged traditional conventions. This may not have been a conventional show car, but that didn't mean it was exempt from the unkind fate that met many of its conceptual counterparts. After exhausting the show circuit, this ruby red beauty managed to escape the crusher by using some good old-fashioned seduction.
It's always interesting how these don't wind up in the crusher. Somewhere along the way, it was either purchased or given after the show years were over to the actor Dale Robertson of Wagon Train and Tales of Wells Fargo fame. He keeps it for a while and then gives it to his gardener, who keeps it for a while. The paint fades badly, the car's in bad condition, and lo and behold, a collector comes along, likes the look of it, picks it up, does some restoration work, and after a lot of years, here we are.
It may not have had an easy ride, but the 1963 Ford Thunderbird Italien survived, eventually finding sanctuary in the protective hands of the Black Hawk Automotive Museum in Danville, California. Decades have passed since its debut, but this alluring show car is still drawing crowds and challenging perceptions.
One of the fun things that happens here is people approach the car in varying positions in the gallery from the front, and they'll look at it and you can actually hear them tell their friends. They'll go, "Oh, look at that, Ford T-Bird." And they get around to the side and go, "I don't remember that."